Yeah, for you.
Yeah, well, actually, you get to sit up front.
Oh, no.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the City of Delaware Historic Preservation Commission meeting of January 24th, 2018. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Coleman?
Here.
Mr. Nicely?
Here.
Ms. Riviera?
Here.
Ms. Van Gundy?
Here.
Councilman Rohr?
Here.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Here.
Chairman Cook?
Here. Item 2 on the agenda is approval of the motion summary of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting held November 29th, 2017, as recorded and transcribed. Have you all had an opportunity to read the motion summary, and are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, I'd like to have a motion for approval of the November 29th motion summary.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Nicely?
Yes.
Ms. Riviera?
Abstain.
Ms. Van Gundy?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Abstain.
Chairman Cook?
Yes. Item 3 on the agenda is regular business item, application 2018-0086, request by the Flying Pig Ale House for a certificate of appropriateness for a temporary sidewalk vestibule for 12 South Sandusky Street, which is on B2 in the Central Business District and located in the downtown core sub-district of the Downtown Historic District overlay. Diane, do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do. As you mentioned, the property is located at 12 South Sandusky Street between Spring and Williams. And this is in the B2 Business District and located in the downtown core, as you said. And here is an aerial of the property. And the building is located in the Sandusky Street National Register Historic District, but it's considered a background building because of all of the modifications that had occurred over the years. And a little bit of background, the applicant purchased the building in 2016 and came before HPC at that time for a wonderful facade renovation, trying to maintain an accurate and historical representation of downtown Delaware. And it came out beautifully and completed in late 2017. And she was also able to successfully open her business in late 2017. And one of the unexpected side effects of being on the main core of Sandusky Street has been the wind tunnel effect when patrons enter and exit the restaurant. And to help shield the guests from these wind events, the applicant is requesting to install a temporary sidewalk vestibule similar to that which was installed at 12 West, which is less than a block away at 12 West Williams Street. And the main difference between those two vestibules is that the applicant will be taking the vestibule down in the warmer months in order to fully utilize the patio area. And based on the design that she has obtained from the same contractor who constructed and installed the 12 West vestibule, the proposed vestibule will extend approximately 2 feet out from the storefront And the top of it will be attached underneath the existing awning. And it should be pretty much in line with the gas meter enclosure that is currently in place. And the vestibule will be installed and contained within the approved patio. And the applicant does have a current and valid sidewalk use permit for that patio, which will be renewed at the beginning of this year. And so the applicant is coming before HPC for two decisions. First, to allow the installation of the vestibule, number one, and number two, for approval of one of the proposed colors. The first is the Sunbrella Tuscan color, which would match the color of the awning, and that is the applicant's preferred choice. Second is charcoal gray, which would match and complement the color of the storefront itself. And lastly is the Sunbrella Black, which would match the existing vestibule at 12 West Restaurant, and which would also complement the storefront paint color. As described in the report, the width of the vestibule would cover the entire width of the inset entry, and there would be clear, kind of like, is it vinyl windows?
My understanding, it's vinyl material.
Okay. Which would provide light into the vestibule and into that inset entry. And then there would be a central door. And the design would also allow for ADA accessibility, so that when the doors are open, that there would be enough room on the interior to allow for wheelchair accessibility. And this is the actual dimensions. And this is the interior of the inset entry. For staff analysis, city staff is, generally supportive of the proposal. And as we had discussed previously, trying to come up with parameters and standards in which to assess each of these requests. 12 West William, the 12 West William Street vestibule has been the beta test for sidewalk vestibules. And with conversations with the owner, by staff, and conversations with HPC by the owner, the vestibule seems to be well received by the community and the restaurant patrons. And being that there are a variety of storefronts, a variety of parcel sizes and clearances and so forth, each request will need to be unique, have its own unique review, and so therefore each would need to appear before HPC as a few business owners have done over the last couple of years. And another parameter that has evolved over time has been the effort of the applicant in exploring other avenues to stop the cold air into the business. And so in discussion with the applicant, she has indicated to staff that she's already tried rearranging the tables in the dining room area. The suggestion of adding additional space heaters in the small spaces near the entry, may pose to be a fire hazard and a trip hazard. There are interior space limitations for an interior vestibule, and the installation of an air curtain at the entry door would prove to be cost prohibitive because of the major electrical work that would need to be done to accommodate that. And we were able to send the proposal around to the other city departments, and we have received comment back from police, fire, public works, and the economic development office, and all weighed in with no issues. And the chief building official would require accessibility compliance. And so if this proposal is approved, then the awning company would provide those final plans to the chief building official to make sure that there is the proper clearances for the ADA compliance. And so in conclusion, staff recommends that the review process for this vestibule be twofold. First with HPC reviewing the design and the temporary nature under the approved sidewalk use permit. And secondly, the city of Delaware would be giving approval for temporary occupancy of the sidewalk or right away for this type of installation. And so as we did with 12 West, we would recommend a 1-year trial period as well for this vestibule, and come back in 2019 to see if it has been successful. And to be consistent with 12 West vestibule, we would recommend that the color of the fabric be black. And so staff does recommend the approval of the request with the conditions that are noted in the report.
Thank you. Do commission members have any questions for city staff?
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
Question or maybe even a comment on page 7 of 9, where it says HP's consistently indicated that interior space et al. I would strongly disagree with those sentences in the fact that I would say we have not consistently done anything. We have, in fact, I'm the one who I think consistently brings up we should have some rigor around this, which we still don't have. We, not too long ago, turned down an informal review that had this as part of it. When we agreed for 12 West to have theirs on there, some of the things, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's in the transitional district and not in the core Sandusky Street, isn't that correct?
Right.
So, that was one of the things. The other thing that I kept trying to bring up was putting some sort of parameters around this so we don't have what we have tonight, which is nothing. We have no rules, we have no regulations, we have no rigor around this. And, we have talked about, or I've talked about, it seems like, hey, what if we tie it to square footage, frontage, something, so that we don't have this? Because what's happening now is, I think what we all talked about, we probably didn't want. In fact, I wrote down a thing. The one thing was either me or Coleman or Mr. Coleman or someone said, I would hate to see these up and down Sandusky Street. Well, that's where we are right now. And so when I read through this, my concern was maybe with staff's recommendation that somehow they had gotten the impression that we as a board have had any sort of consistency around this, which I completely disagree with. I don't know if anybody else does, but we've not had.
You just, anticipated many of the comments I was about to make.
He does that.
Well done. But I share those concerns, and it seems to me we've got a couple things that we need to consider, apart from the individual application. I think we really do have to consider, I think we're starting to open up a can of worms here that we've talked about in the past. And, I really am concerned that, if we start to see, if 5 years from now, we've got 10 of these or 20 of these, because everybody, wants to, I guess, take advantage of the precedent, and we've got no parameters. The 12 West thing concerns me because even though we made the proviso because it was in the sub-district, it was a temporary thing that's become permanent effectively. And I think you get the worst of both worlds when you have temporary materials that have, for all intents and purposes, become a permanent structure. To me, it's almost kind of something you would see in a construction zone, a temporary structure. And I just hate the thought, and this is, nothing against your application, but I just hate the thought that we're going to, at some point create a precedent where we're going to have temporary materials that have become permanent fixtures for all intents and purposes. And at what point, does something that's been in place for 3 years now, at what point is that still a temporary structure? To me, it's essentially become de facto permanent. And I think we need to get some guidelines around that. And then one thing in the application that I saw that, I wanted to focus on, not just with the application, but just in the general sense of, having some guidance or some real, established parameters for these things is, what is temporary? Temporary should be a seasonal thing. If, this is Ohio, it's cold in the winter, it's sometimes hot in the summer, I don't think we should put up these temporary structures in a permanent fashion to essentially, try to mitigate, the geographic area we live in. I mean, we're in Ohio, the weather's going to change. It's going to be warm in the summer. It's going to be cold. Maybe there's the worst of it is probably in the winter because the delta between the outside temperature and the inside, comfortable dining temperature is a lot more severe in the winter. You're talking the difference between maybe single digits outside and 72 degrees inside, a delta of maybe 63 degrees. Or in the summertime, it's 72 degrees inside and maybe it's 90 degrees outside or 95. You're talking about a delta of maybe 20 degrees. I don't think we should have temporary structures that try to mitigate our climate 365 days a year. So I think one thing we absolutely need to establish, and not just for this application, whichever way it goes, but just in general for these types of structures, I think we need to have some real definition of when are these things acceptable, if they're acceptable at all. And I don't think it should be 365 days of the year. I think any current and future ones need to be, we need to determine what's the worst of the weather where these things, are more imperative and limit it to that. And you're not going to limit it. To me, you're not going to eliminate every cold day of the year because I think a reasonable range would probably be something like the 1st of November through the end of March. And yeah, sometimes you have a cold day in October, but not very many. Sometimes you have a cold day in April, but not very many. But you get the worst of the weather, mitigate it. So those are some of my thoughts. But again, everything Mark said earlier, I agree with.
One additional comment then, if I could, because as you mentioned, as the commissioners mentioned, we have been talking about this for 3 years, and we don't have very much in the way of any kind of guidelines. I would actually like to formally recommend that perhaps the city staff could put together a commission or some sort of a working group to study this and come up with a plan. because as you mentioned, it does touch upon multiple areas: historic preservation, economic development, safety and security, and any number of other planning and zoning issues, et cetera. And I think it would be good to have someone from the city staff coordinate some sort of a working group, then could submit a recommendation to city council to include on our standards and any other guidelines that are required. So I'll leave it at that.
City staff have any comments for the commission members?
Well, the items that were listed in the report were items that, the commission had talked about in the past, that these would, be some general guidelines to follow. And, city staff comments is, looking at the uniqueness of each of the parcels and properties that we do have in the downtown. And regarding 12 West's vestibule, if I recall correctly, the property owner did appear before HPC and had asked for an extension time, and that was granted. So we can, we can ask him to, come back, before HPC.
Actually,
Regarding.
if I could speak to that, just because I was not here when the 12 West thing was originally voted on, but I do remember when they came back and they were, I just happened to notice from reading the documents, they were here like a month after they were told it had to be taken down, and it kind of struck me as strange that they were here like a month. They had left it up for a month past when we told them they
They
couldn't.
wouldn't have
They were
done
saying,
that on purpose.
well, can you extend it? And
Yeah.
it was kind of like we had our arms twisted behind our back. So, but I think, to Mr. Nicely's point, I agree with you, but shouldn't we decide as a board yes or no? Because if the sentiment's no, then we don't have to have city
Right.
staff do anything.
Yeah.
And this young lady and everybody else will know, not even to
I agree.
come before us anymore.
Good point.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
How long is that extension for West?
I don't think it was specified.
I think
It was 1 year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I
There's
would
no-
I
have
thought
to
it was a
look.
yearly
That's what I thought. too.
Yeah, I thought
That's
it was
kind of my
to come back
recollection too.
every year.
Mhm.
For them
And-
to keep it up.
But it
Is this
was-
the question at hand?
First to March 15th.
Originally, there
Yeah.
were dates originally. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'd have to go back in the minutes to see if we actually put the dates around it. But yeah, it was intended. But that is to Mr. Coleman's point, then it's nice to keep the flies out and the bugs out in the summer and the hot air, and it saves on air conditioning, and they do become de facto. And I get it. We were at 1808 and they sort of have a vestibule that they don't keep the other door shut when it was like 3 degrees. And every time somebody walked in, it was cold. I get it. I mean, part of the challenge that we always have is that if I were a business person, I would absolutely want one of those. If I owned a restaurant or a bar on Sandusky, I would also want them to tear down the building next to me to build a parking lot for me. So we have to determine, and we always have in this body, that we have to come up with a level playing field for everybody. And that's always been my concern with 14 West, and that's why I said we or 12, whatever it is. We have to have this, that this is a beta, that it's a pilot, however you want to look at it, because I knew the instant that went up, the light bulb was going to go on and people were going to go, I want one of those too. And I actually, it's probably shame on us, because now again, I will say I bring this up constantly, but I think we need to make a decision one way or the other. It doesn't have to be tonight. We can either table this or vote yay or nay on it. I don't know what the pleasure of the commission is, but I think we have to tackle this, and I asked city staff to help us with that too, but maybe we need to decide as a commission what we want to do going forward, and we probably need to make a decision with the one that's out there right now too.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could say one addition to that is I certainly agree with Commissioner Hatton that we need to move forward. I think with the current language of a 1-year temporary permit, we do give ourselves time because it is already January. You're not going to get too many of these this winter, I would assume.
Right.
It gives us some time, and there is an expiration date on any of them that may come up, such as 12 West or the current applicant. And I think one of the things that has struck me over the years that I've been on this commission is we've done a very excellent job of trying to balance historic preservation with the realistic needs of downtown commerce. And certainly in the case of the applicant, I've been to that restaurant and I had to wear my winter coat the entire time. And it would be a discouragement to go back there during the winter if I had to sit near the door. And I think my own preference on this would be to be fairly liberal in our willingness to grant these now, with the understanding that these are temporary and that there is a finite time period involved, and then get our plans all together so we have these guidelines in the future.
The concern I have with that, same thing when we talked with the folks at, I always have to look 12 West, I don't want to call it 14 West, is it's a reasonably large investment, right? And I think what will happen is that once that's out, then it's going to be very difficult for us to say, sorry, 3 months and your $3,000 or whatever cost is down the drain, right? That puts us in a bad position. It's probably not going to be something that council wants to get behind. I think we need to go yay or nay, because once these things get out there, I don't see us getting the genie back in the bottle on that. Mm-hmm. So I think we're at a point where we need to make a decision one way or the other on that. And I did want to point out, and I know it's in here, just because I was at OPA, and they do have the air handler or whatever in the heck they're called.
Air curtain.
It made a dramatic difference. And I get in every instance there's going to be a challenge, whether it's electrical, any sort of thing, right? But one of the things that we do as a commission is we look for ways to address issues, right? And you can say, well, it's difficult to keep paint on a wood surface. Well, the answer is, okay, put vinyl siding over everything, right? We don't allow that. We make some concessions and we say, hey, maybe you could use something like Trex, or you can have a aluminum wrapped storefront, but it has to be this. So we're always making concessions. But one of the things we always look at is, how does the concession affect the external architectural structure, style? Because that is what we have here, right?
Right, and as I recall, when we first spoke with the applicant from 12 West, the very first time, we did discuss to prevent this, not allowing it on any of the Italianate buildings.
Right.
And
basically not on Sandusky Street.
Well, especially on the main
Right.
Sandusky block. So we were thinking ahead there too.
Yeah.
The buildings down here are not quite the same as the ones on the main street. So
Right.
I don't know if you would view that a little differently.
Well,
and that's one of the reasons we viewed 12 West differently.
It's
too.
also, it wasn't in the core district, and that was a much cleaner way than to say,
And it blends with the style of the building too.
yeah, which
Yes.
is not in
Correct.
any way historical. So
Yeah, but I think some of those distinctions are going to be lost on the people that are in the main,
I agree.
corridor,
Right.
historic corridor. And it's, I don't know, I think it's tough to, I think it's going to make it hard to resist, these things proliferating, those distinctions. They may, real as they may be, I think, if I'm the person that's in the main historic district and I can't have one, that distinction is lost on me. To me, it's just, they got one, I don't.
Right.
I think it would create a great divide between the two, main and, and either, being the real estate part of myself, maybe lose value from our main. People are going to want buildings on the side streets just because then they can do more to them, not have to go to the historical area,
And I think another thing is, and I mean, we've kind of talked about it, but just not to put too fine a point on it, things like this, one by one erode what all the other historic regulations have built, and that's a pretty intact historic fabric streetscape. And, you know, a vestibule here and, you know, another accommodation there. Pretty soon these things add up, and all the other things that, you know, we fought against successfully are kind of lost in the weeds and behind all of these other, you know, things that creep up from time to time. And I think this is just kind of the leading edge of something that, you know, 10 or 20 years from now could have a real detrimental impact on the historic fabric down, you know, how it's viewed.
I would actually say 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Give it that long.
Yeah. A couple, you know, we've had 2 really mild winters, so this probably hasn't been as big a priority in the last couple of years because, you know, last 2 years were actually pretty mild. You know, the winter 3 years ago where we had a lot of sub-zero weather, and, you know, this past December, a lot of single-digit weather. I mean, those are the things that are going to cause people to think, I really need to do something different here.
Did Hamburger ask us to do something?
Yeah, so that was the informal review that we said no.
Okay, well, this has been an internal discussion here. At this point, I would like to invite the applicant to identify herself and her address for the recorded record, and you can join the discussion.
Hi, everyone. Amanda Sykes, and my address is 324 Pecan Court. Here for 12 South Sandusky. First and foremost, I think that I'm still young, obviously, in this industry. You guys first saw me like a year and a half ago, and I look like a scared chicken with my head cut off, sitting at the same desk. But I learned a lot from that and what you guys do and what the HPC is for, and I think it's fantastic. And I think that we definitely followed the guidelines as far as restoring the front of our building to try and meet all of the recommendations and all of the suggestions that you guys had, which I appreciate so much because that's one of the things I love about Delaware. As far as the vestibule goes, I can see the conflict on, okay, now we have these side streets and then we have Main Sandusky, what are we gonna do? I like your recommendation, having somebody to come in and set these regulations. How are we gonna do this? What are the dates? What are the times? How is it going to look? For me personally, as a business owner, obviously, like you stated, it's the best solution to keeping some of the cold out. The heat is not an issue. Unless there's an air advisory, people are not saying, I'm not going out because it's too hot, right? They're still going out. In the cold, people are not going out when it's bitterly cold. That's it. And I have people that are unwilling to wait in my restaurant because I don't have a wait space like a lot of other restaurants do. So they don't even come in and put their name on the wait list to even try and get a table because of the cold weather. As far as the heat curtains go, I'm going to be a little bit silly and say, ladies, we're outnumbered here. But some of you guys have some really nice hair. With the heat curtains, it messes everything up. You walk in, it's a disturbance to all the people sitting around you. And also with where we have the electrical signs and how the electrical is run from the apartment upstairs and also into our restaurant, we would literally have to cut out like half the wall to rerun part of that electrical to be safe and have our exit sign and the heat curtain available. Or we'd have to run a cord down into a plug, which also is going to cause an issue as far as safety goes with people tripping over that if it were ever to come loose. With the vestibule, we're not extending out into the sidewalk that we haven't been approved for. We're willing to comply with the colors that you guys suggest, as well as I can make the window sizes that are the vinyl match the size of the windows that we have now. And if you go back to the picture, I don't, the gray one would probably be your guys' preference, which I understand. But we can make the windows a different size to match even closer to the facade of the building to where when you're looking at it from the front, it truly blends in. Now, I'm also going to say this, and I'm going to boast about my business partners. All of the work that was done to the front and on the inside of that building, if any of you guys saw us over the past 6 months to a year, I was there painting. They were there hanging everything. We are handymen, like we can do this. It's not a big deal. And we had this designed specifically so it would be easy for us to take down, fill the holes in the concrete where those bolts are that are holding it to the ground. So no debris gets in there. We could put it up the next time. It's specifically designed so that we have an easy time taking this down and storing it away when the warmer weather comes. So is there not a way to have some type of regulation, like you're saying, to where if it's up past this time, then you'll be fined? I'm happy to pay a fine. If my business partners don't come around with their hammer and their screwdrivers and whatever they need, and they don't take this down for me, I'm happy to pay that fine, because this is going to let me have more customers in my building, more wait space. It's going to let me have more traffic in there. And I think it's going to make it more comfortable for everyone that's coming in there. It's within the guidelines. It's within the color guidelines. It's not going to be garish. And I can guarantee that it'll be taken down when the weather comes around. I'm willing to pay fines if it's not taken down by that time. I mean, and I get all the regulations with the HPC, and I agree with it. I love it, like I said. But can those regulations come with a fine? Can they come with some ultimatum where you say, listen, you didn't do what you said you were going to do that we approved for, and then now here's your penalty?
Well, realize that if we were to do what you suggest, it sounds like you're saying, I really want to keep this up all year.
No.
And I don't care if you fine me.
No, I'm saying.
That's what we're hearing.
You talk about a beta test, and here it's set up for however many years and hasn't been taken down like it said it was going to be taken down. Here's another instance to where you could say, here's the true beta test. Now we're on the core downtown district. Now we're on Sandusky Street. And now they're going to incur some ramifications if they don't take it down. That's the real test. I mean, I'm not trying to speak to anyone else, but like, they didn't take theirs down. They should have. This will be taken down when the weather comes around. It'll be gone. I need that space for more revenue. I need to have that space where that vestibule is going to be taken up to have more traffic coming through that area. So for me, it makes no sense to pay a fine and keep it up and not have that space for more customers on my patio.
That's one of the reasons why I thought it would be helpful to have you sit in essentially on our internal discussion about
Sure.
all of the aspects, positive and negative, that we're going to be looking at. It seemed only fair to let you know it isn't just you, and it isn't just this building. This is a problem that we face because we have to be fair to everybody. You've been in on hearing the discussion of all the toes that we step on, all the mistakes that we make, no matter what we do.
It's a lot more than other people realize. They think you guys are bullies. And I'm like, no, there's like a reason. There's things going on. There's a standard. Like,
Well,
I struggle with this one. Again, my biggest fear is just the proliferation of these. The one thing I would say is in the wintertime, it's not light out much of the day. So it's not going to be as noticeable at night, and the days are shorter. To the extent if we really ratchet down the time frame that these would be available, and again, not to mitigate every chill day, but to take, the worst bite off of winter when it is single digits, and maybe that's, December through March or something like that, or December through February, but just the worst of it is, to me, if we were to limit it and really enforce, for any application of this type of structure, that it is got to be taken down by a certain day, and put some teeth into that. And also, by the way, that also, a violation of that is a violation of your permit to have an outside patio, which is reviewed every year. And flouting the vestibule guidelines or requirements to have it gone by March 31st or whatever it is, flouting that puts your patio in jeopardy as well. To me, that gives it at least some teeth, even maybe more so than a fine, in that, you're going to lose the patio as well. And that's public space. If the property owner doesn't take it down, I would suspect the city has the authority to enforce their property, their right of way, by whatever means necessary, sending a crew in there to take it down and bill it back to the applicant. If we strictly adhere to a very minimal timeline, I could, and have some controls over the appropriateness as far as the massing, the colors, etc. I think that would be probably a fairly, to me, reasonable accommodation that puts some burden on the people that do this, that it's like, it's not just one and done, that I put this up and it's done, and I don't, there's a financial investment, but now there's a time investment, and I'm not just going to put this up, without some thought as to, I've got to take it down in 3 months or whatever that is. So the only people that are going to put these up are the ones that probably really need them. And again, I think it's incumbent upon then the city to enforce that. And I think that, just the fact that I know I'm only going to have this up for 3 or 4 months, or whatever that period is probably going to be enough of a burden or an impediment that a lot of people are just going to say, I'm not going to screw with it for 3 months. I'm just going to deal with the cold weather. But the ones that truly, have a situation where, because of the size of the dining area, the proximity to the front door, it's an issue. I think that probably gives them, what they need for the worst of the winter. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I also think your design, just coming out 24 inches to be in line with where the gas meters are, I don't think it's very obtrusive. I really think the gray or the black, once it was up, if it's put up, I really don't think you'll notice it that much.
Amanda, do you think that it would be beneficial to the discussion if you were to share with us the approximate cost to you to put something like this up? I know it's fairly substantial.
The cost to do this vestibule is sitting at about $5,000.
I knew it was
Had
a
I
lot of
known this
money.
was an issue, and had I been able to get the Columbus Awning Company to get on board when I presented it to them, it would have been well worth the investment this winter. So truly, this is me sitting here trying to get it up, approved, see if it's going to help for the remainder of the time that we have this cold weather like you're talking about, maybe through March or whatever. But it's a future investment for me.
Yeah,
So
I just wanted to have you
Absolutely.
the opportunity to share that with us.
To me, I still come back to, this feels like a tipping point to me. We're at a fork in the road, and I think we need to act one way or the other. And to me, our options are, we can certainly vote up or down on this, yay or nay. I think if we vote no, then we need to, I think our beta test is over, and that needs to end. If we vote yes, my concern is we're putting something in without any standards, as we've spent a lot of time saying we don't have any standards and guidelines. My concern is this then will become the de facto standard, because then if we do put standards and guidelines in place and they differ from what this is, then it will constantly be, well, why can't I have what they have? So one of our options certainly could be, and I know this probably isn't what the applicant wants to hear, but to table this until we have those guidelines in place, because we have a ton of unanswered questions. We've talked about it multiple meetings. I don't even know as an organization that we have come up with the time frame on this. Is it going to be December through the end of March? Winter is what, December 21st through March 21st? Well, it doesn't align with our real winter, so people are probably going to want it up December 1st. We get snow in March, so now all of a sudden they're up for 4 months. I understand what Commissioner Coleman's saying with the shorter months, snow piled up. I mean, it's, it's probably less foot traffic downtown out on the streets, blah, blah, blah. Again, my concern is more around we as a group haven't even decided yay or nay on this. And, this is forcing our hand. And that's what I think we need to do, vote up or down on this, or vote to table it, I think are really our options. And then how we proceed from there probably depends on what that vote is.
I would guess that from the applicant's point of view, if we table this,
Right.
This being.
You're not gonna put
It's
that-
January. Correct. No, I understand. That's what I
It's
said.
probably,
You're looking at the end.
No, I don't, the company is telling me it's gonna take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for them to even install this. So at this point, if you guys gave me a yes, I'm gonna install it and then I'm gonna take it down in a couple weeks. I mean, truly,
Right.
depending on your guidelines.
Which we don't have.
February 28th.
Which you don't have, but I'm willing to respect these imaginary guidelines
Well,
that you
no,
guys have all
but
expressed concern
once it's
about.
built, you can't respect the design guidelines, right? We don't even have any design guidelines for this. And so you're asking us to allow you to build something that we have no design guidelines
Is it the
for.
materials or the color or the
Everything.
shapes
We
or
have
all of
no
it?
guidelines on any
Okay.
of that because,
this is not your fault.
no, it's.
No, I know.
this
And
is
to the
not-
best of my ability, I've asked them to design this in a way that it's going to conform to all of the guidelines for any facade
Right.
in the core district. So we're trying.
And I appreciate that. So again, the timeline, we did this with 12 West. It's, I think, mission creep or whatever you want to call it. Shame on us, shame on city staff, shame on everybody. We should have made the decision, yay or nay on that, probably at least a year ago, right? Path
Yeah,
of least
and-
resistance.
If we're gonna table this and it's gonna go past like a month, I think we should tell staff not to accept applications anymore because this is wasting her time.
No, and that's, I've
Yeah.
been saying that. We need to have something in place.
Well,
I actually am surprised it's taken this long, other than Hamburger Inn. I thought we were going to get a bunch of them.
Well, I think the other takeaway out of this is going to be that the beta test, as somebody mentioned, is over, and we need to,
Yay or nay?
I think we need to let the other instance of this, downtown 12 West, I think we need to, figure out based on the last approval for that, what was the sunset on it, and, let them know that, the beta test is over, and it's got to come down at the end of whatever period of time they were given permission for the current iteration of it, or I guess the current time period. When is that over? It's over then, pending new guidelines, and then it's going to be, it's going to have to come back.
So our guidelines would be retroactive then?
No.
No,
I'm saying,
that's the problem.
I think if 12 West, if they were given renewal for that to coincide with the current patio approval, as far as their application for the outdoor period, and when do those typically expire? Do they all expire at the same time
They're calendar year based.
based on when they applied?
No,
Or is that, okay, so do you know what day that is, roughly?
our revocable sidewalk use permits
yeah.
from January 1st through December 31st. So if someone applies for one in
They were
October,
here in like April last year or something.
Okay. Because I don't think we made that like non-ending, so I guess we need to ask staff to review, the approval on the 12 West Vestibule and see how long is the beta test approved for, and I think we need to enforce that. And then it sounds like we need to, it sounds like we need to get some guidelines established.
What's our realistic if we tell staff now? This is gonna be a few months probably.
Yeah,
If we tell staff, give us.
it's for next winter, to be honest.
Well, they have several months to come up with guidelines, and then we would have the remainder of the year to argue about them and enact
I
something
think
before
maybe
cold weather.
setting a goal of June or July 1st would be good. Middle of the year, that way we have plenty of time to work through standards.
And if it takes 8
Adopted.
weeks.
A question for our council rep. So if we make changes, that has to be approved by council too, I believe, right? So we have to approve it. Is it a 3 reading for council? To the HPC.
No, I don't think.
Well, I think didn't the patio have to go in front of council? That originated
Right.
here,
It-
but,
It becomes an amendment to the zoning code.
so yes.
If we have to amend the zoning code, then yes.
So yeah, and is that a 3 reading kind of thing at
Kind of.
council? You could probably fast track it, but
Well,
Or it, I'm right.
either way, it's going to be,
Most things go to 2
okay,
that are planning zoning.
okay. So several months for that. All right, so that's what I said, for next winter.
Could we not do an up or down vote on this tonight?
Yeah, we
and
absolutely
then-
can,
And
yeah.
then do the standards?
But that's.
We have to.
Right. We have to vote up or down or table it. That's our only option. But to my point, if we do approve this, we've approved it with no guidelines in place, and we can't retroactively change what she's done, right? We can certainly change the timeline and say, okay, they all have to be down March 31st, pick a date, right?
So the
But
risk,
we can't do anything with the design guidelines.
Can we amend this one though and say we're approving this as a non-conforming?
Well, I mean, it would,
One
anything
time.
we do is an exception, so.
I guess the question is, if we were to approve this provisionally pending the new guidelines, then the question is,
The applicant's talking about a substantial amount of money.
No, I know. So there's two ways, if we approve this as a, essentially provisional approval, and then it's got to conform to whatever guidelines we come up with in 6 months. The risk to you is you've spent $5,000 for maybe a month of vestibule based on an 8-week lead time to get it, to get your vestibule up, and installed. And presuming that if we do this provisionally, we're gonna have it, I presume we are gonna have a timeline that's not gonna go beyond March 31st, if that long. So is it worth, is it worth the risk of spending $5,000 on something that may or may not be, that may or may not conform to guidelines that we don't know what they're going to look like?
Right, and what the applicant is presenting is based on the design that was installed at 12 West. So the framing and the material and hardware and so forth.
Which we all agree was a
Right.
pretty high quality
Yeah,
installation.
and I mean, it's entirely conceivable that this could be within, whatever guidelines we come up with. It's quite possible, maybe it's even probable, but it's not guaranteed. And so there is a downside risk that if it doesn't conform, then what?
Right.
So,
I was going to say, and the alternative is the commission could decide not to allow vestibules at
Right.
all.
I think Mr. Coleman was trying to say is that you said a 6 to 8 week lead time to produce this?
4 to 8 weeks.
4 to 8 weeks. Okay. So best case, it's done at the end of February. Worst case, it's done at the end of March. So given that, and given the uncertainty that I'm sure you can sense among this body, would it maybe be in your best interest to say, let these guys figure out what they're doing? Because at best, you're going to have this thing done and it's going to be out there for a month, the warmest month of winter, if you will, March, right? At worst, it's not even done till the end of March. And to Mr. Coleman's point, at super worst is if what we end up with, isn't what you thought it was going to be. Maybe this body says, hey, we're not going to allow it. We're only going to allow it from January 1st to, February 28th. You understand what I'm saying? The risk reward, I wonder if it's really in sync, if you will. And that's a question for you. I can't make that
So
decision.
based on what you guys are coming to me with, as far as what the timelines are going to be, when I went to the company and let them know a week ago, hey, have an informal talk with some people. This is going to be up for review. At that point, they said 4 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
So if I call them tomorrow and say I have approval and I have a permit for this, and they tell me it's 4 weeks, then absolutely it's worth the investment for me, because I am wasting hundreds of dollars on Fridays and Saturday nights because of this issue. Couple $100 probably on weeknights because of this issue, undoubtedly. And then also it's going to help me in the future.
Okay.
If I call them tomorrow and say I got an approval and a permit, and they say we are totally booked, I can't do it until next year, I'm going to say, HPC, thank you. Next year I'm going to have a beautiful vestibule. I'm going to wait until December 1st or whatever your timelines are.
Right.
I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers. I'm 4th generation Delaware. I'm trying to respect everything that you guys are doing. This is for the betterment of our economic development. I'm trying to stay within the HPC guidelines, and I can guarantee you that I'm not going to sit on my bottom and let that sit up and take up space where I'm going to be generating revenue.
Well, I mean, it comes down to, I mean, if we were to, again, approve this provisionally, and, you know, we haven't even gotten into the specifics of your design, but if we can come to agreement to provisionally approve this, you understand, though, there is a risk that even though this is approved for, you know, however long you get to use it this year, it may not be approved for next year. It may not be within standards for next year. So there is a risk that the $5,000 vestibule that you bought this year and used up through, say, whatever, March 31st, there's a risk to you that it may not be something you can use next year. And I mean, if that's certainly your decision, and I think if you're fine with however you decide, I mean, I don't have a problem, you know, discussing what that would, you know, a provisional design, as long as you understand that it may not work next year. And if it doesn't, and you can't use it, you understand that, you know, that's your risk. That would be your decision.
And that was the same thing we presented to 12 West too, that they knew that it may be 3 months and
For 3
it ends up in a
years.
storage unit. What's that?
I said, or 3 years.
Well, right.
I
So,
think we're in agreement with the 3-year beta testing.
I would not be in this industry if I wasn't a gambler,
okay.
obviously, if any of you have worked in this industry. So, I mean, I understand that fully.
A question that I had, and you mentioned ruffling feathers, I really don't want to ruffle your feathers, but honestly, the first thing when I read through this at home is in what they just did this. How did they not anticipate this? Cold weather in Ohio is not a surprise. The restaurant that, you know, your partners are at faces the same thing. Every restaurant here, whether you're a patron or whether you own it, up and down Sandusky, Winter, they all face the same thing. Why was that not in the design plan? It just seems like a giant overlook.
There's not a lot of room in that building, if you've seen it inside
I
and out,
understand all of that. And
to change a lot of that design,
Right.
as well as with Typhoon, there's a different angled doorway and a little bit of an alcove
Right.
before you enter that, so it does block some of that.
Right, but
As well as
in that area.
without throwing, and we have the fireplace up front, which just sweats you all out. Without throwing anyone under the bus, some people anticipated that issue and some people thought that it was a non-issue. And that is why I am here putting in lots and lots of hours of work
Okay.
and my own money to fight the now issue that was proposed
That sounds like.
Right.
months ago.
Well, and I'll come full circle, and we probably need to move ahead at some point, but there are alternatives. Again, OPA, and my wife likes her hair, and it didn't seem to disrupt her hair. I got curly hair, I was fine. I noticed a big difference when we were at OPA. Now, it wasn't 3 degrees, but it was still below freezing. And it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things we've talked about long before you were here is, again, my concern is that if we make this an option, I think almost everybody's going to take that option. And as we look at buildings that are being built, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to maybe put some square footage or frontage around it, because if you're over X, then you really should design in a vestibule. You know, one of the things we talked about 12 West is it's a tiny space. And so I'll admit, I am not comfortable with these. I had trouble with 12 West. I thought, well, this is a weird one-off. It's in the transitional district. There was a lot of things that made that unique. But I know the discussion was, and I put it in quotes, was we don't want these up and down Sandusky. And this is where we are. And I'm not faulting you at all, because I would do exactly what you're doing. And I fully anticipate every other restaurant and bar owner up and down Sandusky to do it. Why wouldn't you do it? Like you said, it solves a problem in the least expensive way, right? And so that's where I am. I'm not trying to take a straw poll, but I'm not there. So that's me.
One thing to consider, if the concern is proliferation, in reality, mostly it's going to be restaurants that are focused on this anyway. I mean,
Restaurants
antique
and bars.
store doesn't really, Gordon bars, antique stores probably don't care.
Yeah.
But as our councilman here mentioned, fundamental decisions on how we operate are our purview. Even if we approve this and we don't punish the current applicant because we don't have standards, we can put a moratorium on accepting any further applications for vestibules until we have standards, and those could be as strict as we want them to be.
But that's assuming we want
Yeah,
vegetables.
right. I mean, there's obviously an
that's
absolute
that's
there.
the tipping point, really.
But if we want to have some sort of an accommodation, we can still make that very narrowly defined, very temporally narrowly defined, very rigorous. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to shut the whole thing down either,
Right.
which is bad for business.
You know, I mean, again, I'm struggling with it. I certainly can, you know, and I know Vice Chairman Hatton, you know, has already said he understands your position and would want the same thing. I do struggle, and I mean, I talk about tipping point. I'm not sure if I'm coming down on Mr. Hatton's side or not, because maybe we don't have these. I mean, you know, I can't think of any other dining districts in central Ohio that jump to mind where these things are accepted.
Not historic districts.
Not historic districts. And I think maybe, you know, we did a beta test, and we've got to discuss before we do anything more. We need to discuss, is the beta test, you know, did we decide that it's successful, it's not successful, and not in terms of, you know, for the application, but, you know, in terms of what we're trying to do and accomplish with the downtown historic district. So I think I'm coming around to Mr. Hatton's side that we should probably table this until we have some determination of, are we going to have vestibules, period? And if so, what are going to be the standards?
Quick question, you probably know this, but can we table indefinitely, or is it 12 months? What tabling would do, obviously not going to help you this winter, but let's say we get things, you don't have to pay the fee. We could take it off the table. You know, let's say we get guidelines in place this summer. You could take it off the table, resubmit your application without paying the fee, correct?
Yes.
So
Even with a changed design.
Preferably not 12 months, or I'll run into this timeline issue again. Maybe 8 months.
right.
According to strictly Robert's rules, you're only supposed to table something until the next meeting, and if you don't take it back off the table, it dies. But
What do you guys do in
this-
council?
But
Do
this
you-
body and nobody, that's why we recommend as lawyers that nobody adopt Robert's rules. You have to follow them exactly.
Okay, all right.
So
'Cause I
it's been
think in the
the
past, we've-
practice of council to table things.
Table, and then occasionally we were like, let's pull this up and vote it usually down at that point.
Never talk about it.
Okay. Well, I think of the city, didn't they, they withdrew were next door, didn't they? Tom sent the letter, he withdrew without prejudice.
And
Or-
we did have another case where the applicant decided to withdraw their application, so it was taken off of the table.
Okay. So one of the things, I'm sorry, Joe or Aaron mentioned, that I would like to see as part of our due diligence on this is what the other downtown historic districts are doing. You know, I know we have some contacts down in Columbus with those folks. Maybe we can
Right.
get a kind of a feel.
Yeah, we went through that discussion when 12 West had brought their application forward. And the historic districts in the city of Columbus, they only allow vestibules on private property.
Okay.
No
Not on
public
public,
right
okay.
of ways. And they're very strict about that.
Okay, thank you.
Do they allow patios?
I'm not sure about patios. It was the vestibules.
Well, what is the pleasure of the commission?
Well, I think I've come around to Mr. Hatton's way of thinking in terms of my sense is we don't have standards, and honestly, I think we made a mistake approving a beta test 3 years ago without standards, and I think we need to create standards before we approve any more. And I think the beta test needs to, we need to see when that approval is up. And once it's up, I think that needs to be removed until we have standards.
If we choose
If we
to.
choose to have standards.
I would propose that since she didn't do anything wrong, that regardless of when we bring this up again, if she's in front of us and we have standards for a vestibule, that she not have to pay another fee to file.
Well, that would be the table, right? If we just table
I
it.
mean,
then-
even if it's a year from now. I
Okay.
think.
Yeah.
Well, then before we make any decision to vote or any move to vote, I would actually like to request we add item 6 to the staff recommendations on the current application. It would read that any temporary vestibule must be removed by March 15th, 2018, to give it a fine date if this does go forward.
I'm kind of lost. I'm sorry. What are you? No, I see that, but
Right, I'm recommending for staff recommendation number 6 that there be an end date saying if this is approved, that the vestibule
I
would
see.
have to be
For- in
removed.
this particular instance.
Right, in this
Okay, I see.
case, it would have to be removed by March 15th, 2018,
Okay.
by, say, midnight.
But that's only if we approve.
Yes, that's for this application, right?
You're gonna be out there a minute.
Yeah.
Stop
Flashlight.
I'm usually there till 2 a.m., so. it's not
No, he meant Aaron.
You want to try and craft a motion? With all of this uproar that you solicited?
Thanks.
As a point of order, first, would we decide first on whether or not to table? Would that come first?
Well, that would be the motion.
Is that all, it's all the same motion?
Right.
Okay.
So I would move to that we table request 2018-000086.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a roll call, please.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Nicely,
No.
Ms. Riviera,
No.
Ms. Van Gundy,
No.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton,
Yes.
Chairman Koch.
Yes. So we have 4 to 3 yes, which is to table it.
To table.
Okay. Do we need a motion to get staff to progress on our suggestions, or is our suggestion sufficient?
I think we can just give them direction.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Right, I would refer that to Dave Eflin, our planning director.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody that has particular thoughts, I would encourage you to email Dave or give them, this ABCD. Everything.
Makes sense.
Amanda, I think this probably takes the $5,000 off the table for you for this year.
Understand.
This is not your fault. This is because we don't have our stuff together. Thank you for pushing the envelope to bring this to a discussion.
Sorry to ruffle your feathers.
You did not.
No.
In fact, I think you actually got us off the dime, and I feel bad that it's not going to give you a decision for this season.
I understand. We
But-
came late in the game, absolutely. And to not sound like a petulant child, the only true anger I have is, all right, Ron, tear it down at this point, in my mind. But I understand all of these complications, and I agree with that.
Right.
I came in at a time that you guys don't have these decisions made. I get it.
Yeah, well,
Of
I
course, it's
hope,
disappointing, but
the time that you invested this evening and putting the application, at least, a takeaway I hope you can, take from this meeting is that you've now got us going in the direction we need to go. Whatever we end up with, you've kind of pushed us to now acting and getting something together
Sure.
so that you at least know what the rules are, what the standards are,
Of course.
and, what you can do.
I'm sure that's warm and fuzzy.
I know it's not what you were hoping to get, but I mean, at least, you're going to get some action from the committee in terms of the commission, in terms of at least, when next season comes around, hopefully there should be some standards or
Sure.
at least a decision whether or not these are going to be acceptable.
I think we should all put on parkas and go sit by the front door.
We're still open, so by all means.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you guys for your time.
and
Thank you.
Presenting. Item 4 on the agenda is staff comments. Are there any?
I think my only comment is, I don't know if this would come from the chairman or from city staff, if we could go back at some point and review what was the latest that we approved 412 West in its vestibule.
Yeah.
Because I, in addition to the 1-year extension, I was thinking we had included dates in there at some point, but I can't remember what they were.
And I recall that he did come back and requested an extension to keep the vestibule up, essentially all year. And that extension was granted. So right, we'll need to pull that back out and
Okay.
see. And then would you want him to come back before the commission?
If he wants to,
I
but
mean, yeah, but I think at this point, unless there's something specific in the last approval that says, you've got a year from January 1st, 2018 or whatever, unless there is a definitive date at this point where that thing is approved to me, I think it should come down by the 31st, pending
You mean permanently down?
until we have standards.
Why can't it wait until we have standards?
Because
Because he is in
Yeah.
the transition.
Yeah, but again, I just think that is kind of, to me, personally, I think that was kind of, well, that's one way we can kind of accommodate this particular application and still, not completely open it up to the whole world. But to me, I think that was
Well, I agree,
kind of.
but being in the transitional area and the type of building he has, I think you have to look beyond just setting a precedent with the vestibule. You have to look at the viability of his business. And he had quite a large problem there.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't,
And you don't want to destroy somebody's business.
theoretically, if we do come up with standards, I mean, at least there were a couple indications from other people that there would be some timeline involved, that it would not be open-ended. And I think, it's probably reasonable to assume if we have standards at some point, it's not going to go beyond a certain date, when the worst of winter and so forth. So to me, I mean,
So
it's good.
rather than just be down or up all year, he would have to take it down for the summer.
which was originally the intent.
I thought that
It was. And
See, I
then he
thought
came in and said, hey, it's so
whole-
great.
whole year.
It keeps the bugs out, it keeps the heat out.
Originally, there was a time frame, but then it.
Yeah, originally.
went
So,
away.
It definitely had a date on it because I remember the date.
Yeah.
It had been passed.
Well, I remember that they came back and asked for it to be extended.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a month after they were already supposed to have taken it.
Yeah, well, true.
So let me ask you a question, since that was a 4-3 vote, and just, I think it's informal. Let's try, I'd like to kind of figure out, so that we're not telling staff to do something maybe we don't want to do.
Fair enough. yeah.
Let's figure out, are we in favor, not in favor of vestibules, in favor of vestibules, maybe only in the transitional district? Do we want to continue what we're doing right now, which is deal with them ad hoc? Do we want to have standards? I keep going back and forth on this, but when I see what they put out there, And I envision that up and down Sandusky, it's not what other districts are doing. And I get the economic part of it. I would be first in line. I'd be camped out to do it. But I would, like I said, I would also want the building next to me torn down so I have convenient parking. You know, we've run into that. Hey, I'd like to have a sign that could be read from, airplanes flying into Port Columbus. And so we have to always balance that. And
That's my issue with them when I first thought about this issue is it's not your property. Like, I'd like to build a garage in my neighbor's yard, but it's not my property.
Well, that's our safety, that's our fallback position.
You can't have it on private property.
Now, this is public property, so that's somewhat of a different, but then the thing that really gives me pause is that we have these patios, and so that's sort of,
Well, and that was
one
one
of
of
my
my,
inconsistency in our.
right.
Well, I don't think the patios detract from the historicness.
Yeah, it's a fence that's.
This would be defined in the military as mission creep. It started out as a patio, and now it's.
It's not really a building standards issue, it's more of a use issue.
But, to Joe's point of mission creep, and not to pick on one of our informal applications, but they essentially wanted to enclose their entire patio like you would see like at Easton, with the outdoor patios and those sort of things. And I don't think it took us.
The hamburger and.
Yeah, and we were, I think, all
Shower.
we were on board with that.
They had like a roll down ones or something.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought around 12 West was it's within the patio, so it's not out in the public area, so to speak. I get it's public, but right, it's not in the thoroughfare anymore because they've got that fence up there. But from a visual standpoint, these things up and down Sandusky, it does, somebody who said it, it looks like it's a construction entrance. It's a temporary.
This is a historic.
This
Idea.
one was actually much less obtrusive.
I tell you, I think to me, to me, the not the easy thing to do, but the right thing to do is just say no vestibules, because that's the thing that you can be eminently fair about. It's not, well, your building is slightly different because of its architecture or its location or prevailing winds. It's just, we don't have them. And, I'm sorry about the climate in Ohio, and I'm sorry about the particular configuration of your building, but we just don't have them in this district. And then we don't have to fight this every year. And otherwise, we're going to.
And there all are alternatives. Again, I invite you to go to OPA if you haven't been there. I think you just put it up a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
It made a big difference.
It did.
And
like $3,000.
yeah, and I understand wiring and all that kind of stuff. Once again, would have been good to think about that since you just built this place.
Did you buy those? Are they like a unit that you can?
Yeah, it's a,
Yeah.
Install them in.
unit
And
that
they
kind of looks like
plug into like an.
one of these.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably a dedicated 20 or 30 amp circuit.
Like that, 2,800, you can buy one.
Call them windscreens,
I
right?
mean, is it a fixture that stays forever?
Yeah, it's up above the door. You wouldn't even really
Inside.
notice it. Go over to OPA, you'll see it.
Hamburger Inn has an old one, I think, don't they? Kind of an older model. And
I don't know.
I don't know.
pretty sure they do, because I can stand under it.
But I would almost guarantee it's probably a dedicated 30 amp circuit, so they're gonna have to be running, like she said, because they didn't think about it. It's not like you can just take the 10-2 that's running the exit sign there, it's gonna, but the point is, and that's one of the things we always go through, is that, it's harder to do a lot of the things we require. Cheap and easy is not really in our standards. And that's, I kind of feel, look, I think they look okay, one-off, right? The problem is when I envision them up and down Sandusky.
Well, I don't know who said it, but I remember it being said in that meeting.
Yeah.
I just think we ought to just, maybe now is a good time to discuss. Maybe we ought to just discuss, do we just say the beta test is over and we don't have them? And that's the end of we don't really have any homework for staff other than, to let 12 West know that the beta test is over, because.
Did you come across any other historic districts other than Columbus, any of the maybe smaller towns?
No, because actually I talked with some of the folks I know in other Main Street communities
Yeah.
like we are, and none of the other smaller communities
I
have
can't.
vestibules.
We could reach out to whatever spoke at their meeting.
So it was-
Yeah. So,
Meeting that I'm late for right now.
oh, is it? All right. Well, you're the one that foisted that one off on me. So, and they have a real good feel, but, just anecdotally being in, Worcester and Troy and different places, I don't remember seeing them.
I know Hyde Park has one in the short north.
Right, but Short North isn't a historic district, and Hyde Park's a brand new build, but, that's like I said, what is it? Schmidt McCormick or whatever, and Easton, they've got the Hamburger Inn one to do, and it's like, so,
They got like half that building's got on.
yeah. So just,
And
Is
we
there-
don't
is there
have that
anybody that-
Sidewalk to give away.
right, is there anybody that felt strongly that we should allow vespers? You seem
I
to
don't,
be.
I wouldn't say I feel strongly about it. My preference is to have a very narrowly defined set of guidelines where we would allow them.
Mhm.
Just because I don't think there's going to be that many of them, and I think the economic benefit to the businesses is worthy of consideration. But I get your points as well,
Yeah.
and I understand what we're saying, and it certainly would be cleaner if we just said
I
no.
can't
In-
imagine why, if I owned a restaurant, why I wouldn't spend that money.
Yeah.
Like I am
Yeah, the rest-
fully on board with her problem.
And I think, again, we've had 2 really warm winters. Now we've got a cold winter,
Yeah.
and I think you have a couple more really cold winters.
Yeah.
And it's gonna, and you've already, once you got 2 and not just one, now you got one of them on the, main drag. I just think they are gonna proliferate. And then once you get 5 of these, you're never gonna put that genie back in the bottle. Putting one back in the bottle.
I think
I
2
think-
is almost hard to put that. That was my
Yeah.
concern with this one.
No, you're right. It is a tipping point.
Yeah,
I'm inclined to just say we're not gonna have them. It's a historic district.
yeah.
I'm fine saying no.
And again, there
I think
is.
what we have done downtown has obviously been very successful, and I'm proud of it.
And it's worked for 100 years
Why?
without them.
Why you started.
It's worked
Yeah.
for 10
No,
or
I'm just
15
saying,
years.
somehow
Yeah.
people have, all right,
Nobody who opens a business downtown can factor that into their business plan, a maybe, so.
yeah.
And as you point out, there are other options.
Yeah.
So you can
Yeah,
put in a
there
windscreen,
are.
You can
So
just kind of vacuum seal the doors out, something.
So question to staff is, if the pleasure of the commission is that these things, essentially the beta test, we, have determined that the beta test is over and it's not appropriate for the downtown historic, do we need to do anything formally, or what do we need to do to essentially,
Notify.
say that's, if the test is over, you have to remove it by such and such a date, and then we're done with these?
Yeah, let me discuss that with Dave Eflin, our planning director, and see what the appropriate course of action would be. But I think, going back, I'm not sure whether having the applicant, from 12 West, come back in and explain that to him, because he was made aware at that time that this was a test.
Well,
So-
my preference, if it's open, it would be to end March 31st. But if we've said in writing or implied that it actually runs through December 31st, then we would have to honor that, I would think, right? But if
Yeah,
that's
I-
open, I would say, hey, look, when winter's up, March 31st, it's gonna come up. You got 2 extra years out of your beta test.
Yeah.
So hopefully you've written the thing off by now on your taxes and put it on Craigslist, I
Sell it
guess.
to somebody in Worcester.
No, in Worcester either. I don't know where they allow them. Out of the strip mall somewhere.
Okay. Any other commission member comments or discussion? Hearing none. Next regular meeting is going to be February 28th, 2018, unless we are otherwise informed. And I'd like to have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? Sure. A motion and a second. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Can you
Thank you.
email us